Welcome to another edition of Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. This week on the program, we're taking a deeper look into U.S. President Donald Trump's invitation to 5 African leaders to the White House. They were the leaders of Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal. They had a working lunch with President Trump and held discussions that centered on business opportunities. Here's a plus for those leaders. President Trump said they were unlikely to face U.S. tariffs. Now that's interesting because at least 20 African countries already face a minimum rate of 10% from the United States. In fact, exports from Nigeria to the U.S. attracts a 14% tariff compared to the 27% that the U.S. government claims it receives from Nigeria. Even so, African countries that trade with the United States should be concerned about the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which expires in September this year, and which the Trump administration shows no signs of renewing. The Trump administration is also pushing African countries to accept Venezuelan deportees, including some newly released from prison, according to Nigerian Foreign Affairs Minister Yusuf Tugar, who spoke about it here on Channels Television, saying the U.S. is mounting considerable pressure on African countries to accept Venezuelans to be deported from the U.S., some straight out of prison. It will be difficult for a country like Nigeria to accept Venezuelan prisoners into Nigeria. We have enough problems of our own, for crying out loud.
Mauritania is a great country in the sense of its strategic position. It is on the Atlantic.
Anyway, back to the African leaders' visit to President Trump at the White House. Trump said the leaders hailed from, in his words, very vibrant places with very valuable land, great minerals, great oil deposits, and wonderful people. The African leaders then began to tell President Trump the benefit of investing in their countries. Just take a listen.
We are not poor countries. We are rich countries when it comes to raw materials, but we need partners to support us and help us develop those resources with win-win partnerships. That is our wish. I often listen to your remarks and speeches, Mr. President. We also want our raw materials to be processed locally in our country so that we can create value and to create jobs for youth so that they stop dying. They are crossing the sea, the ocean, to go to other countries. That is what we want, to have local processing of raw materials. Gabon is a rich country. We have over 2 million inhabitants and a great deal of diversity, raw materials, oil and gas reserves. And we would like those resources to be tapped using an economic model that fits. Since our liberation, we have changed how we do trade.
We have a great deal of resources, many, many resources, and we have a lot of opportunities to offer in terms of investment. We have minerals, rare earths, rare minerals. We have manganese. We have uranium. And we have a good inclination that we have lithium and other minerals. We're the second largest producer for the last 60 years in Africa of iron ore.
Guinea-Bissau is a peaceful country. And we are a small country, but we are a great state. Not a great state like the United States, but we are a great country as well. And to end, we are be following your dynamics and the war with Russia and Ukraine.
We want to encourage American involvement in the investment in Liberia. Yeah. We'd like to see that happen. We want to work with the United States in peace and security within the region because we are committed to that. And we just want to thank you so much for this opportunity.
We are in favor of this dynamic for peace.
The leaders then went on to express their support for Trump's nomination for Nobel Peace Prize.
No one wins when there's war. So you have our support so that we can bring peace back. Thank you. He is now bringing peace back into a region where that was never possible. So I believe that he does deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. That is my opinion on this.
Those leaders are back to their countries now, so let's discuss. I have joining me Doctor of Philosophy, International Relations and Security Relations, Francis Opaleke. He joins me from Auckland in New Zealand. Dr. Opaleke, thank you for joining us on the program.
Oh, the pleasure is always mine, Amarachi. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. What did you make of the choice of countries that President Trump invited to the White House?
Well, I think the list is quite selective. I was kind of very interested to see big players come up in terms of the invitation list, but to see small players like Gabon, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mauritania, and Senegal in the mini summits just kind of left a lot of questions to be answered. But by and large, I think there was still something in that summit that President Trump's administration was really looking towards to seal, and that is that transactional diplomacy, a follow-on the art of the deal that Washington is trying to propagate with the America First agenda right now. So essentially, there's something these countries have in common, and if you look very closely, I think is the supply chain and the mineral resources that these countries really have. We're talking about manganese, lithium, cobalt, diamonds. All these things are really available, and these are resource-rich countries that still got a seat at the table. But essentially, inviting them brings a very burgeoning question to the table in terms of what does this country stand to gain in the grand scheme of things. And one thing only kind of stands omnipresent. For example, if you look at it, the Liberian president, Joseph Boakai, was already in the United States and got the invitation. So it kind of leaves me wondering, was that a strategic invitation or more like an opportunist invitation? I think the jackpot winner in terms of the invitation was the Guinea-Bissau president, President Umaru Sissoco Embalo, who has no embassy in Bissau, but and has minimum U.S. trade interests. But I'm just very curious, the interest to bring Guinea-Bissau to the table as a small player, in Africa, kind of just boils down to one thing and one thing alone, that America just wants to continue propagating the art of the deal. It wants to secure minerals. It wants to secure vital economic partnership that would ensure that important mineral resources from these resource-rich countries find their way and flow to Africa, to America, as well as, of course, opening up the opportunity for partnership and for trade.
Yes, so President Trump is very transactional, isn't he? He's also very strategic with America's relations with other countries. And as you rightly pointed out, it's probably the resources that these countries possess, which is the reason why he invited them to the White House. But it has nothing really to do with promoting democratic values, because you see Gabon, there was a coup there, and then finally the former president's nephew is now president. Senegal did have, credible elections, which brought in the current president. He's a young man who seems to be very forward-thinking as well. You have a Guinea-Bissau whose president has also survived a coup attempt on his life. You have a Liberia that has been, trying to open doors to as many countries as possible. They're calling for investments, even from here in Nigeria. What do you think President Trump's real and core interests are? The fact that America, didn't look at, what democratic values that these countries possess and invited them to the White House.
Yeah, I think it's purely strategic, very strategic. I think it still goes back to what I said ab initio, speaking to the fact that President Trump is all about the art of the deal. Now, this has been, a very, very strong element about his administration. Even in his first term as the president, it was all about promoting America first. And every country that can have the opportunity to bring something to the table that advances economic economic pragmatism is certainly what would pique the interest of the Trump administration. Yes, these countries have been through, very different stages in their democratic journey, and certainly they are still going through, through that fair storm. But one thing is very omnipresent: the Trump administration wants to get, countries at the table that helps them advance trade over everything else. Now, let's think back again. The Trump administration have cut off USAID, they've cut off aids given to Africa, and they are all about commercial first. Can you bring something to the table that helps America? That is essentially what really will be the cornerstone of his conversation. So while these countries are not really kind of basking in the euphoria of strong democracies, they certainly have something economically, resource-wise, that benefits the administration. As long as those things are on the table, they are always a potential trade partner for the Trump administration, which is definitely what we're really seeing here: economy over anything else.
Do you think that the president's figure that, presenting the opportunity for America to come in and invest would provide some covering for them against U.S. tariffs and further economic changes in relations between the both of them? Because, it is said that the Trump administration says that it will not be imposing tariffs on these countries. Do you think that, they also forwarding the potentials of their countries? I mean, you heard Senegal talk about the mineral resources, Gabon also, explain in a way, what the U.S. stands to gain about, U.S. investments coming in before other investors, take up the whole place and all of that. Do you think that they're thinking that the U.S. could provide them some economic covering, as against all these other partners that they have?
Well, actually, the truth of the matter is this: Africa is rich, but it's the people that are poor. And when you have only resources as the main thing, as your mainstay, you always use that as a bargaining chip. The truth of the matter is Gabon, of course, pitched investment in manganese, potassium, uranium. Mauritania, of course, promoted lithium, uranium, as well as rare earth metals. But the reality of the matter is this: as long as these things are present, that is only when they can have a conversation or a seat in the grand scheme of things for the Trump administration. If these countries are not willing to really kind of go further down the line to talk about trade partnership that benefits the grand scheme, the grand strategy of the Trump administration, I don't really think they will have anything further down the line to really provide. I think this boils down to neocolonialism. Africa still occupying the periphery, right? While the center of the center, which are countries that are well advanced, continue to use Africa as a source of resources to kind of benefit their own advancement to their own gain. The truth of the matter is this: these countries are pitching their resources, but then again, what do they get in return? Yes, they might get some handouts in terms of aids or in terms of support, but further down the line, it kind of goes back to say one thing: if Africa goes back to the drawing board and says, hey, look, with these resources that we have, if we kind of turn things around and start looking inward in terms of how we can advance ourselves, the neocolonial tide can actually shift. So we can start looking more inwards in terms of how we can advance, how we can better ourselves, how we can use these resources to better our people, and of course to improve the economic advancements of the continent as a whole.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like much negotiation went on in the White House between President Trump and these leaders. And let's not forget that President Trump never visited an African country when he was president the first time. At this second time, he does seem to be using one stone to kill, as many birds as possible. But, if these countries have this much to offer, why are they not offering it to other African countries? Why are they looking to countries outside of Africa to invest in Africa? And then shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't it be the U.S. coming to these countries to negotiate?
That's a good observation. But the truth of the matter is this: why we're not offering to other Africans is a very interesting question. But the reality is this: there's still that colonial mentality or post-colonial mentality seeping through Africans. African countries are still attached to their former colonial, colonial countries, by the tail. As you can see now, a number of these countries are trying to cut off or severe ties. But the truth of the matter is this: economically and politically, these things run deep. Okay, and historically, right? Africa has always used these resources as the bargaining chip to have certain conversation, and it is not an inward conversation that is happening. It's more like an outside conversation, meaning these resources are being used to kind of negotiate, to kind of get foreign aid, to kind of court foreign investors, to also kind of court partnership. For instance, look at what is happening with China. For instance, most of the infrastructure for resource investments and conversation going on is still using Africa's rich resource to really kind of get partners or kind of give something to get something in return. So I think, yes, Africa ideally should be the epicenter for investment opportunity. People should be coming to Africa, to come and attract bigger investment deals and all. But the truth of the matter is this: we are seeing the obverse. And the obverse of the situation is such that Africa has not done well enough to really kind of solidify itself from a strong position to ensure it can negotiate from a very strong place. And of course, attract international partners that can actually come in and have this conversation at the highest level.
Yeah, I was really surprised that the Senegalese president did honor President Trump's invitation. Not that he shouldn't have, but Senegal has been trying to break away from France as well as many other Francophone West African nations, breaking away from that tie from France. We see that, with the countries that now have a military dictatorship in them, they're choosing their new partners. And, you would think that Senegal would be looking more, being very careful, about who it picks, especially with this new president. But then again, also, is the fact that China has such influence, on Africa, and it does call dibs on most of its resources. So I'm wondering if, this might also have been the motivation for President Trump, coming to inviting these countries and not going there. It does seem like a power play to me. And I know that China is carefully watching exactly what the U.S. moves are under President Trump.
Absolutely. I think this is a piece of chessboard. As the United States makes moves, China, of course, is also on the sideline, also kind of making super moves into Africa. Let's not forget, African-China trade as of 2024 is about $295 billion, and these are predominantly from exports. And this is projected to increase by close to 10% in the next coming years. What does this tell you? Africa has found its roots in China has found its taproots in Africa. But then again, if there's anything the Trump administration wants to do, he wants to scuttle China dominance, particularly in Africa, because Africa is seen as that center port for major investments and major opportunities to actually come flying. And the reality is this: if United States can find opportunity therein to follow in or to kind of implement a trade over aid kind of deal, I think that will give it a better position into able to reduce that strong Chinese influence in Africa.
So I know this is the first stage of, the negotiations going on between the U.S. and these 5 African countries. But do you think that there will now be perhaps a U.S. presence, in these countries, a follow-up? Perhaps the Secretary of State Marco Rubio taking his time to, seal this deal with whatever deal it was that they discussed in the U.S., because up until now, we really don't know what deals were signed or what negotiations were formed, what partnerships were solidified. There's really no news from this meeting that happened in Washington.
The big question have always been, was there any significant wins for African leaders that were there present? Was there any win for the small players present? Now, yes, I know the Senegalese president has invited the President Trump for a Gulf coast development project in Senegal anytime. But then again, we want to move beyond that narrative to do things that are more lasting for the country further down the line. Now, it would be interesting to see if US makes visit the continent to actually sign deals and to be more genuine in terms of its intention further down the line. Is he willing to enter partnerships with Africa with the intention to actually improve the economies of this country, to improve them democratically and politically as so? Or is it just coming to just make face that it has come to Africa per se? These are the questions we should be asking, because Africa needs to be much more strategic in terms of who it invites or open its doors to. Not just everyone just coming in, but with a clear intention to ensure that most of these agreements benefit them further down the line.
Indeed, especially with all of these leaders making trips everywhere. But did you find it interesting that none of these African leaders ever brought up the issue of the Trump administration cutting U.S. aid to many African countries, also with the visa restrictions to some countries, and then visa ban as well. No advocacy for any other African issues. The deportation, which is the most recent one that the Nigerian Minister of Foreign Affairs did point out, the deportation of Venezuelans, including those in prison, to Africa. The U.S., he says the U.S. is trying to put pressure on African countries to accept those deportees. Do you find it interesting that none of these leaders even mention any of the issues affecting the continent? And then they went on to praise President Trump and then, support his nomination for a Nobel Peace.
I think if you look at it and what they're bringing to the table, I think it just kind of just goes back to one thing and one thing alone. We have still not come up with a very strong strategy in terms of where Africa needs to be. That voice that echoes that this is where Africa needs to be as a continent, I think is not something that is still unified and present in the country as a whole. So everyone will speak individually, and definitely the United States is a big country. It has a lot to offer, and it has been historically been given to some of these countries prior. So I'm not surprised, or it's not surprising that they didn't ask, but I would have expected that some of these conversations would have featured, because right now these are the current issues that are really blighting a number of these African countries from really kind of spreading its wings and flying away. Think about tariffs. The issue of tariffs, if you open your mouth and go this direction, you may be slammed a big tariff. And if you slam that big tariff and you depend solely on imports, you know what that means? Your economy tanks. If your economy tanks, poverty level increases, hardship increases, and naturally this might also be a casus belli for a democratic upheaval to take place in this country. So I think these leaders were going first and foremost for things that benefited them in the meantime, but not strategically looking deep into the future in terms of what this means for the African continent as a whole.
Dr. Francis Opaleke, I'm glad I was able to catch you this time. Thanks for joining us on the program. We hope that you will join us for more discussions as the year progresses. Maybe we'll cut President Trump some slack. I mean, he's been dealing with Israel and the war in Gaza and the war on Iran, trying to stop their development of nuclear weapons, and of course the war between Russia and Ukraine. So maybe the U.S. president is very preoccupied right now, but he did make time to host those African leaders. We'll see what comes out of this meeting. He still has at least 4 years or 3.5 years, I think. Thanks again for joining us on the program.
Always a pleasure, and thank you very much.
Just before we go on Diplomatic Channel, we'd like to wish the people of France a happy Bastille Day. It is their national holiday on July 14th, and the consulate in Lagos held a celebration. What is a 14 Juillet without a party? And for parties like this, the French usually invite friends, associates, with the colors of blue, white and red gaily displayed. In the room tonight at the Lycée Louis Pasteur in Lagos are members of the French consulate in Lagos, fellow diplomats, government officials, and members of the French and Nigerian business community. Amidst the camaraderie and banter going on, guests are treated to an array of French snacks and wine. The evening formally opens with a rendition of the Nigerian and French national anthems. And the French Consul General, Laurent Favier, extols the cordial relations that exist between France and Nigeria, highlighted by President Bola Tinubu's visit in April this year.
Our bilateral relationship, which has a long history, significant growth has occurred recently. For example, late 2024, President Tinubu's state visit to France and working visit of a couple of different governors in Paris last April mark the climax of this relationship today.
He also highlighted recent projects that both countries are working on together.
Our economic ties, that are very, very flourishing. Nigeria represents 60% of the trade in West Africa with France. And to date, more than 100 companies are operating in Nigeria and employing more than 14,000 Nigerian people. That deserves a round of applause.
Representing the Lagos State government is the Commissioner for Budget and Economic Planning, who is also highlighting cooperation in agriculture, renewable energy, and cultural diplomacy.
In November 2024, Nigeria and France signed a €300 million agreement to boost agriculture, infrastructure, and security. A landmark achievement that promises tangible benefits for our people. Lagos is poised to benefit from these initiatives, particularly in urban mobility and renewable energy. Earlier this year, we also welcomed the French ambassador, from Bastille, to discuss expanding cooperation in agriculture and water transportation, areas critical to our development agenda.
Some lucky Nigerians win the lottery prize of e-tickets on Air France. That brought events of the evening to a close, leaving guests to catch up on more chit-chat and banter the rest of the evening. Amarachi Ubani, Channels Television News. That's the program this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.